Every answer begins with a question. For nearly 1500 years, Egypt asked one that no one could answer. What do these symbols mean? Temples spoke in pictures. Tombs whispered in stone. Walls were covered with birds. Eyes, snakes, suns, and strange human figures frozen mid-motion. They were beautiful. They were precise. And they were completely silent. To the world beyond Egypt, this civilization was a locked room. Everyone could see inside, but no one had the key. The Greeks tried. The Romans guessed. Medieval scholars invented myths. Some believed the symbols were pure magic. Others thought they were secret philosophical codes, too sacred to be spoken aloud. A few insisted they weren't language at all, but abstract symbols meant only for priests and gods. Century after century, the same mistake was repeated. Everyone assumed ancient Egyptians thought differently than we do. That assumption kept the door shut. Then, in the summer of 1799, during a military campaign far from home, a group of soldiers began digging the foundations of a fort near the Egyptian town of Rosetta. They weren't searching for history. They were building defenses. Sweat, dust, stone, ordinary work. Until one slab didn't break. It was dark, heavy, and covered in writing. Not just one kind of writing. 3. At first glance, it looked unremarkable. Broken at the top, rough at the edges. Just another artifact in a land overflowing with ruins. But someone noticed something strange. The same message appeared 3 times, carved in 3 different scripts. One was unmistakable, Greek, clear, readable, familiar. The others were not. One was flowing in cursive, later called Demotic, the everyday script of ancient Egypt. The other was older, more formal, filled with the symbols that had haunted scholars for centuries. Hieroglyphs. For the first time in history, the unknown stood next to the known. This wasn't art. It was a parallel text. A translation waiting to happen. When news of the stone reached Europe, it ignited a quiet intellectual war. Casts of the inscriptions were rushed to scholars across the continent. Everyone wanted to be the one who cracked the code. Everyone wanted to be the voice that made Egypt speak again. But progress was slow, painfully slow. The Greek text was read easily. It turned out to be a decree honoring a young king, praising his generosity, reaffirming religious privileges. Nothing dramatic, nothing mystical. And yet, that ordinary message was carved into sacred stone. Why? Because the meaning wasn't in the content. It was in the structure. The same decree, 3 scripts, 1 message. This meant hieroglyphs weren't mysterious symbols chosen at random. They carried specific information. They followed rules. They repeated patterns. They behaved like language. Still, old habits die hard. Many scholars insisted hieroglyphs were symbolic only, pictures representing ideas, not sounds. An owl meant wisdom, a snake meant danger, a sun meant divinity. End of story. Then someone noticed a detail that refused to stay quiet. Certain groups of hieroglyphs were enclosed inside oval shapes. These shapes appeared again and again, always around the same clusters of symbols. They weren't decorative. They were names. Royal names. Because in the Greek text, the king's name was clearly written. And those same clusters appeared in the hieroglyphs, boxed off, protected, repeated. If those symbols spelled a name, then hieroglyphs were not just pictures. They were sounds. This realization did not come easily, and it did not come without resistance. Egos were bruised. Careers were risked. Entire academic traditions were threatened. Some scholars clung desperately to the idea that ancient Egyptians were fundamentally different, too mystical, too symbolic, too other to use phonetic writing like everyone else. But language does not care about pride. It obeys patterns. And one man was obsessed with patterns. Jean-François Champollion had been fascinated with Egypt since childhood. He learned languages the way others collected stamps: Latin, Greek, Hebrew, Arabic, Syriac. He believed that to understand Egypt, one had to think like an Egyptian, not impose foreign ideas onto the past. When he studied the Rosetta Stone, he did something simple, but revolutionary. He trusted the evidence. He compared names. He tested sounds. He matched symbols across texts. He noticed that the same hieroglyphs appeared in foreign names, like Cleopatra, spelled phonetically. Picture symbols, sound values, together. Hieroglyphs were not purely symbolic. They were not purely phonetic. They were both. In 1822, Champollion made his breakthrough. According to legend, he rushed into his brother's office, shouted, "I've got it," and collapsed from exhaustion. For the first time in nearly 15 centuries, ancient Egyptian could be read again. Not guessed, read. Suddenly, the walls spoke. Tombs stopped whispering and began explaining. Names emerged from stone. Prayers, jokes, complaints, inventories, love poems, insults, all preserved, all waiting. Egypt was no longer a mystery civilization. It was a human one. Farmers argued about land. Workers complained about rations. Priests negotiated power. Kings worried about legacy. Parents mourned children. People wrote letters to the dead, hoping they could still listen. The Rosetta Stone didn't just unlock a language, it restored voices. And here's the quiet irony. The stone itself was never meant to be special. It was not a holy object. It was not unique. It was a government decree, mass-produced and distributed across Egypt in multiple copies. This one survived by accident, reused as building material, broken, forgotten. History didn't change because something rare was discovered. It changed because something ordinary was understood. That understanding reshaped archaeology, linguistics, and our relationship with the past. It taught us a dangerous lesson. When we assume ancient people were less intelligent, less logical, or less human than us, we blind ourselves. The symbols were never silent. We just weren't listening correctly. And perhaps that's the deeper message of the Rosetta Stone. Not that the past is unknowable, but that understanding requires humility. Every civilization leaves behind traces, marks, stories written in forms we don't immediately recognize. Sometimes the barrier isn't time or decay, it's assumption. For centuries, Egypt waited, not for discovery, but for comprehension. Because history doesn't change when we find something buried in the ground. It changes when we finally learn how to read it. Every answer begins with a question, and sometimes all of history is waiting for the right one to be asked.